The reason they call them blue bloods was because they have more copper in their system.
Yes.
And the copper turns the blood somewhat bluish.
Rock-solid DNA-driven human beings actually have far more capability and power than them.
Well, I agree with that. In fact, they really are afraid of us. That's one of the key attributes of the reptilians is they really have nothing that we would recognize as a heart or love.
Our fascination with horror never ends, and one of the most terrifying stories humans have been confronted with is the presence of reptilian humanoids on Earth. There are a myriad of books speaking of their influence over Earthlings, and today we'll be looking at the history of these beings with Len Kasten, author of Alien World Order. And welcome, Len. We saw each other last time over Project Serpo, right?
Yes.
And this one is, wow, it's intensely well researched. But we also have testimony in there from some very common threads. Some know Stuart Swerdlow, for example, whom I've interviewed also. But a lot of this is coming from the early part of the story is coming from Robert Morningsky.
Yes.
And we're going to get right into that and talk about who he is. But may I say something before we even begin?
Sure.
As scary and ubiquitous as this story seems to be, you and I are of the same opinion, and that is that human beings, real solid, rock-solid DNA-driven human beings, actually have far more capability and power than them once we start to wake up and understand that.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. In fact, they really are afraid of us.
I know. That's why so much oppression. The last thing they want to see this happen here is what's happening right now. We're waking up.
Exactly.
And so I just have to say that right up front before we go and scare the bejesus out of people, okay? So first of all, let's talk about Robert Morningsky and how he came into this story and the nature of the beings that he's speaking about.
Yes, his grandfather was really the key person who was involved in the rescue of an alien from a craft that crashed in the desert on the reservation. Mm-hmm. I believe
New
it was
Mexico.
New Mexico.
In 47, before Roswell.
Before Roswell, yes. And his grandfather was one of the 6 young men that discovered the site of the crash and rescued the alien and nursed him back to health because he was hurt. Mm-hmm. And then he left and he started living among us as a human being. He was able to do that.
Okay, quick question. Was the government aware that there was a survivor?
No.
I mean, I'm sure they must have kept this secret. Though.
Native Americans typically will not report these crashes because there's nothing in it for them. They see that the military comes in, takes the wreckage away, and takes the survivors away, and they don't know what happens to them. So they don't need to report it.
Yeah.
They don't choose to. It's their property.
Right. So you said that this being, how did they describe the being first, and how was he able to pass among humans?
He was human-like, apparently, and that's why he was able to continue telling them his story later, after he had already become absorbed into the human race, because he left the reservation after he came back to health, and he continued the story. His name was Bekti, they discovered, and gave them the whole story of human existence on this planet.
Where was he from?
Morningsky never discussed that. He never disclosed that.
But he was more human, not reptilian human,
No,
but
not
human.
reptilian. Human-like,
Did he
yes.
have any features that would distinguish him as separate from humans, or was he human enough that he just passed?
Not from what I learned from Morningsky's writings, no.
Okay.
He was able to pass, as so many are.
Right. And now again, Robert was getting this from his grandfather, who was present at the time, and he was present to the stories as they were being relayed in the day?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the information, starting with the place he called the Green World.
The Green World was in this galaxy, apparently, and we don't know exactly which planet it was. Morningsky refers to it as the Green World. Mm-hmm. And that was the nexus, that was the original home world of the reptilian species that we now call the reptilians. And according to Morningsky, it really started with dragonflies. Mm-hmm. And the dragonflies over millions of years evolved into what we now refer to as reptilians, scaly-skinned, humanoid-looking beings. And They retained some of the characteristics of the dragonflies. However, they did have wings, and they were able to fly, and this was a tremendous advantage in their battles, which were many, and because they were able to attack an enemy flying as a host, and Morning Sky describes it as an angry buzz coming from them until they were upon their enemy, and then they were very difficult to defeat.
Fast and vicious and had claws and all the above.
Yes, they had claws, and so they became all powerful on the green world, and they went through several phases on the green world. Eventually, they began to evolve into more, not quite as ferocious and warlike as they were business-like, and what they originally relied on to dominate in terms of ferocity now became business acumen, and they became money-oriented. Mm-hmm. As the reptilians became more aware of technology and learned how to fly to their moons and to inhabit their moons and to mine their moons, they gradually started to go out into the cosmos. They developed spacefaring technology. And since they were a very fierce race, they had no trouble conquering the entities that they encountered wherever they went. And so they really developed an empire.
But why? What was the motivation?
That's the way they are. They have no other modus operandi. All they know how to do is to dominate. Mm-hmm. They're not a peace-loving people. Mm-hmm. That's the key. That's one of the key attributes of the reptilians is they really have nothing that we would recognize as a heart or love. Right. Okay, or affection. Mm-hmm. They don't have those capabilities. Mm-hmm. They just don't. That's the way they're made. Mm-hmm. So all they know about when they encounter another civilization on a distant star is how do we dominate them and make them our slaves. And that's been what they've been doing for hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps millions of years.
So it's been speculated with people who write about the Anunnaki and such that this was done for a purpose, where maybe they needed a resource or something like that. You're saying, no, it's just what they do?
That's what they do, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we know people like that. We know governments and countries like that, ours being
well,
one.
We have certain characteristics similar, yeah. But we're much more than that.
Yes, we are much more than that.
They are not.
And we're going to get into that part of the story because really to me what matters in all of this is the statement we made at the very top, and that's where we're going to end. But we still need to maybe understand some of the nature of the depth of the interference that's been going on as a result of the presence of this particular DNA pool.
Right, yes, mm-hmm. Right. And so their encounter with human beings began in the constellation of Lyra. That was the first time that humans and reptilians met, and Alex Collier tells that whole story in his book, Defending Sacred Ground, and that's a book I would recommend highly. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
And Alex is tremendous. He's a good writer and everything, and he knows the whole story because he's connected to the Andromedans, and the Andromedans, of course, know everything about this. Mm-hmm.
And so let's talk about the beings, the Lyran beings. Okay, we can go into the trajectory of Mars and to Earth. But let's look at where the reptilians finally made it here, where the crossbreeding started and so forth. Just paint that picture because it's two divergent paths that come back.
I think before we do that, we have to talk about the fact that the male reptilians dominated their society for hundreds of thousands of years. When it came to actually developing stable societies of the entities that they had defeated in battle, they left that to the females. The females were the ones that actually devised the systems for controlling the populations of these planets.
Did it happen through crossbreeding?
No. The
they
females
just knew
were
how
just
to dominate.
The females were just adept at that, and so they did all the work that was necessary to
subdue a species.
Keep their conquered peoples in line and fearful and controlled, mm-hmm. and contributing their labor, which was that's what they did. They were enslaved. Mm-hmm. Eventually it became, rather than just simple enslavement, they realized that enslaving conquered populations was not the right way to go. They would simply let them develop their own society and contribute money, okay? Just
Introduce a monetary system.
Introduced the monetary system and banking as they developed. And that's how they controlled those societies. And the females were the ones who were drafted to do that kind of work, while the males went back out into space and conquered a few more star systems.
Then now let's start on the rest of that story. So the males are out conquering. Here you have planet Earth. We have an Earth with a newly developing species.
Yeah, before we get there, though, we have to talk about the fact that the females began to realize that they really were the most important. They were more important.
This is where they become dominant.
That's right.
Right, okay,
They were more important. They were running these star systems. They were supervising. And they finally realized, well, why shouldn't we have the supreme power? Why should the king be in charge? And they revolted, and instead of a king, they replaced the king with the queen. The reason they call them blue bloods was because they have more copper in their system.
Yes.
And the copper turns the blood somewhat bluish. And so they became known as blue bloods. And they were in charge of all of the basic civilizations in Europe and all over the planet.
Right. And
Hitler
was
over.
in league with them, but Hitler himself wasn't reptilian.
Well, his father was really a Rothschild.
Well, I was going to say, and not only that, there's a little book that I read years ago called Hitler's Secret Backers, written by one of the Warburgs. And he was talking about how those families, the big banking families in America, were the ones who gave the lion's share of the original funding to Hitler to get started, get his uniforms, and make a presence in the world.
Allen Dulles was part of that.
Yeah, Dulles was part of it.
And also some of the Allen Dulles and his brother, John Foster Dulles. The Blue Bloods basically have controlled our civilization for thousands of years now. And the reptilians keep us, the population, in a dumbed-down state because they know that we have the capability of expanding our consciousness and eventually reaching into the higher dimensions, which they can't do.
They can't do.
They can't do that.
They don't have the refinement.
So we have the capability, and that's why they're afraid of us.
Right.
They know that. They know that. And they keep us subdued through propaganda, which is one of and mind control.
Right.
Mind control is their main technique, and hybridization. Now, all the abductions, the whole abduction scenario is for the purposes of hybridization. They are creating hybrids in large numbers all over the planet. Now, the hybrid body is not able to accommodate a human soul. A human soul cannot enter a hybrid body. There's something about the DNA. So when we deal with hybrids, we're dealing with aliens. And as the hybrid population grows, and the more human-looking hybrids start to take over all the positions of power, eventually the spiritually based humans, will be dispossessed.